Saudi and
Continue. Bismillah. I can hear you. I can hear
yeah,
you very well.
again, between Saudi and Iran, the claim is that it's a Sunni Shia divide,
Hmm.
and basically, the West they sort of play on that to cause further schisms, differences between the Muslims, between the Muslims and the Middle East. But if I look at the bigger picture, in my opinion, and I could be wrong here, again, this is my analysis of, and it's my analysis of my reading and my research. I don't think it's a Sunni Shia thing, and again, I'm not downplaying that because there is that issue, and we can't deny that there is a Sunni Shia issue, which I guess has been around. But more than that, I personally believe that Saudi has regional ambitions and Iran has regional ambitions, and
Absolutely.
these ambitions, they sit outside of the Sunni Shia ikhtilaf that has been there for centuries. It's been there for, that's not new. That ikhtilaf between the Sunni and the Shias, it's been there since the time of Ali radiallahu an, yeah? And, that ikhtilaf is not going to change anytime soon. So I think, that's one thing we need to accept. But like you mentioned, in terms of the differences between the two countries, I think it's outside of the Sunni Shia schism. Rather, it's more that Saudi is a secular power. On paper, they say that, that they adhere to Islam, etc. But and if one looks at Saudi and Iran, one can conclude, again, in my opinion, that both are secular nations and both are regional ambitions. And because of those regional ambitions, they're up against each other. And I think, that is so does that book that you were alluding to, in terms of the Cold War between Iran and Saudi, I think this Cold War is emerging because both countries have regional ambitions and both sort of vie with each other to take that sort of dominant position within the Middle East.
That's
Exactly.
a good. That's a good intro. That's a good intro. Do you think this is only started now? What's your take on the idea that Saudi and Iran are even competing against one another? Because we have, for example, a very recent interview with Mohammed bin Salman, Prince Mohammed bin Salman, in which an American reporter questions him about basically this competition between Saudi and Iran. And he says, we're not competing with Saudi, with Iran. Where's the competition? Are they even a worthy competitor for us to compete with? So, as you mentioned now, it may be something that the West is pushing upon to divide the nations a bit more, like to emphasize the
I'm
difference.
shared. What is shared? Does that mean you're just what was that mean?
Sorry, brother.
Yeah, bro. I think it's based on our Ribbo scores, honestly.
I'm sorry.
I don't know why.
Sorry, can you repeat that again? It's based on what? Brother Isaiah, I think if you just repeat it again, I think your mic may be muted. Okay. So yeah, I mean this difference, uh, just defining the difference to begin with, as you mentioned very rightly, brother Owais, is it even a theological difference?
Yeah.
Is it even a theological difference? Could it be a different sort of kind of competition between these two very, very important, and they are very important players in the Middle East? No problem. You can come back. You can come back, inshallah. You can come back if you want to unmute. You can come back.
Also, just to add to what you're saying with Saudi Rahim, also I guess Saudi sort of perceives a threat from Iran in the sense that Iran has a bit of a footprint in Yemen, in Iraq as well, in Syria, and Saudi sees that as a regional threat. And even though MBS, and I think that interview that you were referring to, I believe I saw that as well. And like we know, politicians, leaders of states, they say one thing, but in reality, it's something else. And I think that's the case here. But MBS is trying to say something, but in reality, it's something else. And unfortunately, Saudis create this perception of Iran being the enemy. And again, like you've alluded to as well, it's not theological, rather it's political, and it's these political ambitions that unfortunately are causing division within the ummah. And like I said earlier on, our enemies, and especially the West. When I say the West, I don't mean everyone, i.e., the powers that be within the West, they basically play on this, and they exploit this. Unfortunately, like we've seen, especially over the past decade.
I think there's a lot. You're right in many things here. That's certainly the difference. Absolutely, that's that separation or that dichotomy between, are you siding with Iran, Shia Iran, or are you siding with Sunni Saudi? This is definitely being used in the public space. In fact,
Mm.
it's trickling down to even the ordinary people.
Yeah.
When we're looking at Gaza, and now there's almost like a spectrum. Are you going to side with the Sunni Saudi bloc, who are apparently doing nothing? Are you going to side with the Shia Irani bloc, who are apparently at least doing something? And this division is exactly what is a perfect ground actually to divide the Muslims and to break up whatever form of, I wouldn't say unity, there's no unity at the moment, but conformity that we may have had up until now, to really cement that. And I can't imagine a better time than now to emphasize the difference actually, to put people against one another. But it is something that has been going on for a long time actually, since before uh, 79, 70, 78, 79, but especially when Khomeini comes into power and he promises to export the revolution. He promises to export the revolution. And primarily when he says to export the revolution, what happened in Iran was to export it to places such as Iraq and Saudi Arabia and the surrounding Arab nations. And this was something that really, you could say legitimately, the uh, the kingdoms, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, these kingdoms in that region were threatened, because if he's able to inspire people to do the same thing across these regions, then of course we're going to be at risk, directly at risk. And that's why you find, for example, someone such as Saddam would try to preempt and invade and effectively give the first strike before waiting for it to come to him, because as we know, Iraq at the time, up until now really, is a majority Shia nation, which was at that time controlled by a minority Sunni nation. So it was a very big risk. If you think about someone saying to you, you've just taken over this government, we have done something quite amazing, and we're going to export this same sort of revolutionary spirit across the region. Well, then, of course, the Sunni uh, governments are going to be worried. So that is something that hasn't stopped. And in fact, if you look at the patterns, it's a Cold War, the same way Russia, the Soviet Union, and America was going around the world, dividing the world. You know, if you side with us, we will give you support, military training, arms, finances, protection. And the world as we know it was divided between the allies of America, the free world, the first world, and the allies of the Soviet Union at the time. And so we found something quite similar, because if you look at the wars that we're witnessing and the tragedies that we're witnessing, going back to Syria, you remember the ISIS epoch, Iran was there as well, wasn't it? Iran was there. They were back in militias. Also, some of the Gulf nations were also back in militias. So it is a war of attrition. And wherever we find, unfortunately, if you think about it, the last 15, 20 years, wherever we find atrocities within the Muslim nations, it's today's Gaza, it was Syria before that. Wherever we find these sorts of tragic events, you have financing from either side. It's a war of attrition. Okay? Who can get in quickly, secure support on the ground, and effectively it's like almost fighting through others. What we're seeing today in Gaza is exactly that, because Iran, at first, I don't think Iran is doing the right thing right now, because it's drawing itself into something that, if it is pulled in fully and it becomes a fully blown out war between Iran and Israel, which really means Iran and America, then it's strategically speaking, it's great for Saudi, because think about it, your greatest enemies in the region are fighting one another. However, it turns out you're actually getting rid of some enemies. If you can get rid of both at the same time, even better, without breaking a sweat. So there is certainly on the ground, strategically speaking, there is a competition, but how that manifests is exactly what we want to talk about, because we're the people at the bottom. We're the average people. we're the ordinary Muslims who are watching this. And if you look at the public opinion right now, it is swaying. I can't remember a time when we've seen so much discussion about Sunni Shia unity. I haven't seen a time in my living experience where there's been such an emphasis on Sunni Shia unity. And all because we're seeing Iran, and to be honest, the Shia nations standing up and saying we're going to support Palestine, Gaza, we're going to support Gaza. We're seeing Shia nations or Shia majority nations making that move, right? It's a great marketing strategic step forward. Uh, so it is a competition, but again, there's a lot more to it because the history, quite frankly, goes a long way. I don't know if you remember, uh, has anybody watched The Message? Mustafa Akkad, Al-Risala, the very old movie on the Prophet ﷺ back in the days, The Message, right? If you remember, in the opening scene, you have the messengers who are going to the different parts of the world to deliver the message. You have one messenger goes to Heraclius in the Byzantine Empire, and he gives him the message. And one goes to Abyssinia, to Najashi, he gives him the message. And one goes to Persia, to Khosrow, and he gives him the message. The response from Khosrow, if you have time, you want to go back and watch that movie at the very beginning, that response is amazing because he says to him, you Arabs are coming from the deserts, right? What do you have to do with us? And if you read the full, for example, the Sirah, the full narrative, there's a lot of contempt there for the Arabs. There is a contempt for the Arabs. And that was because they were high civilization. The Persians, the Sassanid Empire, is a biblical civilization. It goes back a long time. And they were the only one amongst the other three who really took it hard to accept Islam or to even acquiesce towards Islam. And we look at Iran and Saudi uh, from antiquity, even up until recent times, there has always been a competition anyway for who has the true Islam. There has always been a competition for who has the true Islam. What we are seeing now is a political manifestation, as we've seen before, to be honest with you. In the 90s, we've seen that as well. But even more so now because Al-Aqsa is like a jewel. It is a representation of Islam, right? This is a holy site, and this is effectively the heart of the Muslims. Who is going to defend this wonderful and holy and important site? Spiritually speaking, who's going to defend it? Of course, Iran would like to be that force, that actor that shows that we are the true defenders of this deen. We are the true ambassadors of Islam. We are the real inheritors of Islam. Whereas Saudi Arabia on the other side, of course, they already have custody of the Kaaba, Mecca, Medina. But there is a tension, there is a competition that even the average person can actually see and feel right now. So I think it isn't as simple as saying that it's only political. There is something underlying there. There is a great deal of fear, I think, on both sides, to be honest with you, on both sides. But we have to understand the historical background, the context, and also look into it because we're living in these times right now. We are living in the times when we're seeing these two major forces in the region competing. And as we watch the news and see the updates, we need to be able to tell a history and understand how things got to where it is today and what can potentially come out of it. What can potentially come out of it. Personally, looking at what happened in 1979, and that was a very pivotal moment actually, 79. The Kaaba was besieged, Juhayman and his crew. We've got the revolution in Iran. Many things happened in 79. Governments were changed in Iraq. But there was a competition that began in 79 to see between Iran and Saudi who can be the most religious. And this book covers that, by the way. In the first 2 or 3 chapters, it covers that episode. From 79 onwards, there was a competition between the two nations to prove to the Muslim world who was the most authentically Islamic and who was the authority, the moral authority for the Islamic world. Khomeini was effectively representing a new world order. He was able to get rid of an old order, establish a new form of Khilafah. And you had the Saudi establishment trying to compete with that. And that is why, from the 1980s onwards, there was a huge influx of Saudi printed da'wah material translated and being sent across the world. There was a lot of funding from masajid and organizations, Islamic organizations, to spread the da'wah across the world. There was a competition. That competition is kind of toned down a bit now, but what we're finding is a different competition right now. It's a political competition. It's also a social economic competition. We're finding that, as you can see, 2030 is a very key milestone for Saudi Arabia. The drive now is the opposite direction. We want to go back towards 79, towards a more open society, towards a more, you could say, modern society. And that's where Saudi is heading. Will Iran follow suit? I think it will. I don't think it has much of a choice at this stage. I think it will have to do that. But there is a competition. Either way, they are definitely at loggerheads with one another. What does that mean for us? That's really what we want to know about is the individual, ordinary Muslims watching these things. And also to realize, look, even Gaza is nothing more than, it's another battlefield. It's another theater of war between various forces, not just between the Muslims, certainly between the Zionists, the Americans. Many people have a stake in this, but it's a matter of seeing who actually folds first and who has the most to lose in this. Somebody raised their hand. Sorry, I didn't see it in time. Somebody raised their hands. Feel free
That
to
was
jump in, please. Don't raise your hand. Just feel free. It's an open platform.
that was me, Awais, that raised the hand. Just a couple of points. I do agree with you. We shouldn't simplify it and just say it's politics. There is that sort of religious aspect to it as well. But when I say politics, I think the political aspect has come to the fore a lot more over the past 10 years compared to previous decades. It wasn't so political as it is now. So that, like you speak of the competition, I think the competition is so blatant now. That wasn't the case maybe sort of 10, 20 years ago. So that's why I mentioned political. But just a question for yourself, Ustad Ibrahim, in terms of unity between the Sunni and the Shia, and I know it's a complex topic in terms of unity between Sunni and Shia. It's not something that's straightforward. And historically, there's been wars between the Sunnis and the Shias. If I think of the Ottoman and the Safavids wars, the Fatimids against Salahuddin al-Ayyubi, rahmatullah alayhi. So, those wars have been there. But having said that, you know, parts of Iraq, which were Shia, lived under the Ottomans as well. Yes, there were issues there, but by and large, for many centuries, those Shias did live under the Ottomans. So, there are examples of Sunni Shia unity in our history. But looking forward, in your opinion, in your experience, how do you think we can achieve this unity? Because right now, this unity is so paramount, and it's so important that we put our differences to one side. And again, I'm not underestimating how difficult it will be to put those differences to one side, because again, those differences go back centuries, and ironing out those differences, will be a challenge. But in your view, what is the recipe for unity to overcome the challenges that we face as an ummah, which is 1.8 billion big?
I don't, to be honest with you, and direct and candid, I don't think the Sunni and Muslim world at that level, politically speaking, is going to unite. I don't think so. And what I think doesn't matter, quite frankly. I'm a
Yeah.
nobody. But based on the precedents we've seen the last 100 years, the Sunni Shia unification has not been something that has even been on the card, quite frankly. There have been various attempts to unify on various different levels, as Arabs, for example, the Ba'athi movement, and also the North African Union, between the Maghrebi states, they're also unified at some point. There's unification on ideology, such as, for example, you could say nationalism or socialism or Islamism. There have been many waves of unification across the Muslim world in the last 100 years since the fall of the Ottoman Empire. What we haven't seen is a Sunni Shia unification. We just haven't seen that yet. And there is a lot more at stake for either side, quite frankly, for them to even think of unifying and coming together. Now, it is true that we have had cases where Sunnis and Shias live side by side. We know that in Yemen, for example, that was the case. In Iraq, that was certainly the case. It was a majority Shia nation with a Sunni government, and that was the case. So it was possible for them to combine, to live in a society, and not necessarily be at war with one another. But the sort of unification we're thinking of, and we hear it a lot actually, let's just unite, let's unite, let's unite. Where have we seen that before between Sunni and Shia? Where have we seen that unification, politically speaking? It's been a very difficult history. Sometimes we can live side by side, other times we're at war. We've actually seen more cases of Sunnis or Shias siding with external parties, Christians and Jews, than to side with amongst themselves. Yeah, it's a vast difference. It's a vast difference, and there are many things that I believe, would make it very difficult for that to even be a reality. To be honest with you, there are many things that will make it very difficult for that to be a reality. So, will we see unification? I would hope so, but being realistic, we've not seen one actually. I can't think of one anyway, but correct me if I'm wrong. Sunnis and Shias getting along, politically speaking, at a national level. There are gestures. They will meet, they will shake hands, but this is just optics. Yeah. It's just optics. It's not a real unification. What we can hope for, what we can call for, what we can perhaps campaign for, is that despite being separate and divided, bitterly divided, we don't become the useful tools, to put in a better word, by adding fuel to the fire. There's already a fire, but we can make it a lot worse as Muslims or the average people by actually adding fuel to the fire to create further division. Yeah? That we can control. We can control that by not making it worse than it already is. But will it ever be unification? Quite frankly, I don't think uh, that's even a possibility given the current situation. Genuinely, I don't think it's a possibility, but I could be wrong. I could be wrong. Brother Talha.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Yeah, just food for thought, right? Even if masses were to unite, just let's just say the Sunnis and Shias to unite, the
Sorry,
masses.
brother. Your mic are you on loudspeaker?
No, I'm just using my my headphones.
Okay, that sounds better now. That sounds better.
Is that better? Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, just food for thought, really. Even if the Sunni and Shia masses were to unite, what objectives do you think would be met? The reason I say that is because, for example, when the PLO movement is happening, and then Hamas was creating, the political agendas were totally different. So I feel like it needs to be more of a political unification. I mean, like, people will always live side by side, but what does that achieve?
Well, let me put it in a different way, right? Do you think in the height of the Cold War in the 80s, late 70s, 80s, and well, it ended in the 90s really, when the USSR was disbanded, but do you think it was even a possible, even a dream that could even be thought of, that America and the USSR could unite? Could you even imagine that to
At
be
that
the
time,
case?
no.
Yes. Yeah, definitely not. It was impossible. I mean, they went to war on every possible front, even the space race, right? Who can get to space first was another
Yeah,
competition. Who can get there first, right? There was
yeah,
no way America and the USSR were going to align on anything. It was just not possible unless there was a third party greater than both of them that could put them both at risk. In that case, my enemy's enemy is my friend. Right? But
yeah,
that wasn't even a possibility, quite frankly. And although it's not to the same extent, same magnitude, I do consider the Saudi Shia conflict or the competition to be along the same line. I couldn't fathom any possible way for these two parties to come along politically and unite, not over Gaza anyway, not over Gaza. And the point you make concerning PLO and Hamas is a very strong point, because we've seen in 2006 there was an attempt, and it didn't last even a couple of weeks. There was a civil war after that. They still haven't been able to unite, even within the region of Palestine, We're talking of the greater region. Even within Palestine, there's no unification between the PLO and Hamas. So it is something that we would hope for, but let's be realistic. I don't think.
See, the reason I make that point is because the Israelis, right? They had the three militias before the state was founded. I can't
Established.
remember yeah, before they were established. I can't remember the exact names, but at the start they weren't united politically. But when Ben Gurion came into power, you know, there was an attempt made to actually bring them all together in one army. So I think that political
It's,
unification is very important.
let me jump. Let me jump. That's a good point you made. It's a bit different though. It's a bit different
Okay.
because let's take it back to Ibn Khaldun again. It's important we take it back to Ibn Khaldun. He talks of the early phase of any dynasty or any empire or any nation for that point is based on hunger to survive. The Asabi is strong, right? Because you are
Yeah.
now trying to establish yourself somewhere and you are under fire. So you have to stick together and work together to survive. Those Zionists, the early Zionists who came into the region, they were on survival mode. Yes, they may have had different factions, different militias running around, but they were trying to survive. They didn't have the luxury as we have today, for example, Saudi and Iran. They have a luxury that they can survive without the other person being there to support them. They're fully established societies, governments, economies. They don't need one another. So the Asabiya, if there were to be any, would be very weak at this stage. Those Zionists at that time, they needed it. They had to survive. They're still a minority. So you might have a different battalion here, a different faction there, but ultimately speaking, they have the same ambition, the same drive, the same fears. We can't say the same of Saudi and Iran. They don't have the same fears or the same enemies. In fact, it's diametrically opposed. Iran's enemies are Saudi's allies. Saudi's enemies are Iran's allies. So there's no commonality there for them, politically speaking, anyway, to join forces. Now, you may say they both hate Israel. Okay. But is that hatred of Israel sufficient for them to come together to unite? I don't think so.
I think that's a very good point. I mean, because especially at it from a religious point of view, anyway. You were talking about the point of Asabiya. There's no ukhuwa between the Shia and the Sunni anyway. So
Not at all.
I guess that's a very, very strong point.
Yeah. There's no ukhuwa, and it's not long. It's been long. It's not longer. It wasn't a long time ago. It was just the 90s when Saddam was running around like a rampant dog,
Mm.
like a rabid dog, trying to enter nations. And he tried to enter, Iran, Iraq war. You know what happened there, right?
Yeah.
Then he turned on Kuwait. Then he turned on Saudi. At that point, if there was to be any opportunity for unification, that would have been it. If there was to be any opportunity for them to unify Saudi and Iran, that would have been it. We have a mad person in the region, right? Trying to take over the whole region. Let's come together. They didn't do that.
But also, Ibrahim, wouldn't you say that you're absolutely right in terms of what Saddam did? But if one was to say that Saddam's basis was secular, and a lot of these attempts over the past, 100 years, those attempts of unity have been based on secularism. Unfortunately, they haven't been based on Islam. And I think, when unity is discussed from an Islamic point of view, Islamic political unity, I think things are different. And maybe that question hasn't been explored as it should be. Because even, for example, if I think of the Arab Republic that lasted for a few years during the time of Gamal Abdel Nasser, between Syria and Egypt, again, the basis for that wasn't Islam. It was secular, Arabism. And, Arabism was a big thing back in the 60s and 70s. Again, the basis, for that wasn't Islam. And I think if I look at all of these attempts at unity over the past 5, 6 decades, their basis hasn't been Islam. And I think, in my opinion, I could be wrong here, but I think maybe that was the reason for their failure.
Let me ask you a good question. That's a very good point you made. Let's take the whole century that went past,
Yeah.
24 to since the end of the Ottoman Empire.
Yeah.
Whether or not the Ottoman Empire was the glue that that's irrelevant. There was still a visible representation of something, right?
Mm,
Whether
mm.
or not they were effective, that's beyond the point. They represented something, an institution, right?
Yeah.
Once that was taken away, 100 years later, have we seen a single movement, either, well, let's say international movement, that was successful at unifying various groups based purely on religion? Pan-Islamism, have we seen that succeed anywhere in the world in the last 100 years?
No, we haven't. We haven't.
Okay. So
We
what makes
haven't.
it, yeah, is that has it even been something that we can say has been a success if we go back into antiquity? If we go back maybe 500 years, 600 years, have we seen a pan-Islamic unification?
I mean, if you look at the Ottomans, for example, when Sultan Selim comes to power in the 1500s, the Ottoman state for at least 400 years was a centralized state.
Subjugation.
Yes, there was that,
Subjugation.
but
Yeah, that was
it
forced.
wasn't perfect. It wasn't perfect, but by any stretch of the means, it wasn't perfect. But there are accounts. So, if you read the books of Muhammad al-Harb, for example, if you read the books of Muhammad al-Salabi, he's an historian on Ottomans. He's an authority on Ottoman history. Dr. Yaqub Ahmed as well. These are some contemporary historians, who have written extensively on the Ottomans. Yes, there was that aspect of subjugation. There's no doubt about that.
Let me
But
ask you something. It's good. I like this. I like this. You do realize that when the Ottomans, Selim comes in, fair enough.
yeah,
He takes the Khilafah, okay?
yeah.
But there were three Khilafah establishment at the same time. At that time, we had three at the same time. Yes, he was able to, let's say he marginalized certain elements, the Safavid, for example, and then you had the Fatimids, but it was actually fragmented the Muslim Ummah because now we have three caliphates at the same time. It wasn't a form of unification. It was just a form of, look, we'll take this part of the world, you take that part of the world, and there was a segregation, and that maintained. Okay, yes, later on you could say the Safavid eventually died down or they lost their power, but it wasn't unification. It was more of a conquest of other regions that were a bit perhaps competitors. So you acquire that real estate, but effectively it was still three caliphates at the same time.
But you're right. You are right. But I guess obviously that wasn't an ideal situation for the Muslims,
Mhm.
and that isn't an example or a model for us to look back on. But nevertheless, there was that khilafah that I guess that the Muslims wanted back then. But I guess for us, our gold standard is is the society of Medina and the Khilafah Rashida that came after that. That's the gold standard that we've back to. Will we achieve that gold standard again? Maybe not, because we are not at that level of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. But the Khilafah Rashida was a very centralized state. And also what came after that in terms of Umayyads, the Abbasids, again, that wasn't perfect. There were gaps in the Umayyad state. There were issues with the Umayyad state, the Abbasid state, etc. But I think when we look at any model, when we look at any political um, setup, in my view, the Khilafah Rashida and the state of Medina should be taken as the gold standard. And of course, just to reiterate the point, we will never get to that standard of what was achieved in Medina and the Khilafah Rashida because that was the best generation. But we can.
Okay, so how far do you want to stretch the Khilafah Rashida epoch?
Sorry?
How far do you want to stretch it? How long did this ideal state last for? If you want to enumerate, how long did it last for this state to be?
In terms of the Khilafah Rashida, obviously it was the four Khulafa, isn't it? And some say Umar ibn Abdul Aziz, he was the fifth rightly the fifth rightly guided leader of the Muslims. But
But in terms of uh, I want to just engage you. I'm not being rude. I just want to
no,
engage
of
you.
course, of
I
course.
appreciate definitely what you're saying. I just want to engage you. And you can join in if you're in the chat. You can join in. Don't feel that you have to raise your hands. Join in. I'm just being the angel's advocate here. So, okay, we have an ideal. Ideals are not always necessary to be met. They are just there to inspire, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
We take the Prophet ﷺ as our ideal, qudwa, right? But
yeah.
we know very well none of us will ever attain the maqam of Rasulullah.
Yes,
We know that.
Of course.
So that's beyond even the pale of possibility, but we still take that as a guiding star, right? So the Khilafah Rashida, it is something that we will never attain, quite frankly. We will never attain. And even when it was around, it lasted 30 years at a stretch. At a stretch. Soon thereafter, you had a division. People of Kufa went their way. They elected Al-Hussein radiallahu anhu. Abdullah ibn Zubayr had his own Khilafah in Mecca for 9 years. The Umayyads had their own Khilafah in Damascus for 9 years, for more than 9 years. They actually conquered afterwards. Then the Abbasids. We haven't had a period where we could say there was a Pan-Islamic unification and there was no problem. Right? It always requires for one person to overpower the other person. It always required for that. Whenever we had a semblance of unity, it was because one group crushed the other group. This is why when Abd al-Malik ibn Marwan and Hajjaj assassinate and kill Abdullah ibn Zubair, that year in which Abdullah ibn Zubair was killed and hung and humiliated and decapitated in public, do you know what that year was called in Islamic history? What that the title we gave that year? The year of sorrow, the year of grief, the year of massacre? No, the year of unification. And it was celebrated. Yeah. Because in order for us to be unified, there's going to have to be a lot of compromise and a lot of people have to be subdued and crushed. Yeah. So there is a high price for that unity. And it didn't last long. Soon thereafter, the Abbasids come along and they do the same thing. So it's a matter of who's stronger, being able to subdue the rest. And Salahuddin did the same thing, radiallahu anhu, right? There has to be a power that is strong enough to subdue the other powers and to give us a bit of peace for a while. But the idea that somehow the Ummah would be inspired to have a pan-Islamic unification peacefully, that is something that I would love to see. But again, we can just look at history in recent times and we can see that that's something that we haven't seen. You know, it's more likely that we'll find America, the Soviet Union, joining together voluntarily than for Shia Iran and Sunni, the Sunni world effectively, to join politically. And we can't, to be honest, we don't even see that within Palestine between the PA and Hamas. We don't see that unification yet. So it's very difficult, but it doesn't mean we don't try. What we can do as individuals is we don't feed the fire. We don't feed the fire. We don't end up causing, because we have people saying, let's unite as Muslims. The division Sunni Shia shouldn't matter at this point. That's not a problem at all. I don't think it's a problem anyway. But then you have others saying, no, we can never unite because of creedal differences. Right? So we want to fuel or want to continue the division, even amongst the low level citizens. And that's not going to help anyone, quite frankly, at this stage. It's not helping anyone. So it is something that is difficult to even fathom, but Allah is capable of anything. It's possible. However, just looking at the historical track and where things are going, I would hold my breath on that.
Can I just make one final point?
Yeah, of course you can. Bismillah. Make as many points as you like.
Jazakallah for your very, very important feedback. I guess one thing I would say is that, again, you know, our past wasn't utopia, and you know you've done a well you've done a good job in describing that. You know, the past wasn't a utopia; it was full of flaws. But despite that, if you look at the Ottoman state, and you're right, you know, at the same time as the Ottoman state, there were other states competing with other Muslim states that were competing with the Ottoman state. There's no doubt about that. You know, it's a fact of history. But nevertheless, and again, you know, the Ottoman state wasn't a perfect state. They had their flaws, you know, they had their faults. Because, like you say, you know, we can never. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is our example, but we can never achieve what the Prophet achieved. You know, there's no doubt about that. And I think in the same way, the Ottomans couldn't achieve what the Sahaba achieved because the Sahaba were the best generation. So, you know, naturally, the Ottomans would have had their faults. Yeah. But having said all of that, there was still, like you said earlier on, there was an institution in place that represented the Muslims globally and it defended the Holy Lands. It defended Al-Aqsa, it defended Mecca, Medina. You know, I was reading an incident when the Portuguese Empire tried
Yes.
to annex Jeddah. It was the Ottomans and the Mamluks that came to the defense of Mecca and the Hijaz when
And the Somali Sultanates as well.
yeah,
That
yeah, yeah.
region.
No, Jazakallah. Yeah, you know, when the Portuguese tried to annex, you know, the Hijaz. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that that institution, and yes, it was flawed. There's no doubt about that institution, that caliphate institution of the Ottomans. It was flawed, but there was that institution in place, which whether the Ummah agreed with it or not, it was there to represent the Ummah, and the other global powers recognized that as well, and you know they respected that institution as well. You know you know, they wouldn't look at the Muslim Ummah the way we are seen today. You know, and I guess the point I'm trying to make is that even though that institution may have been flawed, unfortunately that institution doesn't exist today, meaning there's no representation of the Muslims today globally, like we used to have, whether it was good or bad, but that you know that voice existed, which we don't have today, unfortunately.
I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't disagree with anything you've said.
Yeah.
I'm not an idealist. I don't think we have to wait until we have a perfect system
Mm.
for things to work. I'll give you an analogy. You know, the house of Islam is on fire. There's a fire, right? The house is on fire. Our children, our women, our parents are in the house. We're outside the house. Each one of us has a bucket. Some of us have a bucket full of water, and the water's a bit muddy. Others have a bucket full of water. It's a bit, you know, it's a bit cold. And we're arguing. You know, my water's better than your water. My water's clear, your water's not clear, it's muddy. My water's warm, your water's cold. Waiting for the ideal situation or the ideal solution will cost us more in the long term because the immediate need is to extinguish the fire. Whether my water is muddy or clear is irrelevant because water is still water, isn't it, at the end of the day?
Yeah.
Even if it is filthy water, there's a quality in water that extinguishes fire. So whether or not the Ottoman Empire was perfect or not is irrelevant. It was the water necessary to extinguish the fires of its time, and it worked. So the ideal state is not something we're going to achieve anyway. Maybe until Imam Mahdi comes along, or Sayyidina Isa comes along, alayhi salam. We're not waiting for the ideal state. Right? But what I'm saying is where we are right now in 2024, with the things we're seeing, is it possible? Do we think even the flawed system, which brings unification, that's not likely to happen? I don't think it's likely to happen. If we're waiting for Iran and Saudi to unify, even if it's a compromised unification, that's what I don't see happening. I'm not saying we have to wait for a perfect unification, mashallah, brothers in Deen holding hands. I'm not saying that. I'm saying even if it was to be a flawed unification, just seeing Saudi and Iran come together like that, I don't see it. And the reason why I don't see it is because whenever we've seen this in the history of Islam, there has always there always has to be a dominant party. They always have, anyone who's gone into business can tell you something. I'll give you a bit of advice if you're thinking of going to business or you've gone into business before. The worst business deal you can enter. Maybe you can tell me the worst business contract you can enter if you're trying to go into business is a 50-50 deal. If you're trying to get into business and you want to enter on a 50-50 deal, look at all the legal advice online, entrepreneurial advice. They'll tell you the bare minimum should be 51-49. The bare minimum on your contract, 51-49, right? But don't go 50-50. And the reason is very clear. Now, on the outset, it sounds romantic. 50-50, we're all brothers in, let's go together equally. But the reality is, very few businesses that enter that deal succeed long term. Because there will always be one party who wants to dominate more than the other. Always. I don't see right now how a Saudi Arabia and an Iran can be 50-50 on anything, quite frankly. Least alone to be the representatives of the Ummah, the global Ummah. Yeah. That's where I find a problem. And that's where this book comes into play. Because there is a struggle, there is a competition, there is an element of competing against one another. But I don't disagree with you at all in terms of just the general outline. Certainly, I am for the Ottoman Empire. I think they did a great job, actually. And every single year, we are seeing just how, although some of us want to blame the Ottoman Empire for having failed in many areas, we're seeing that even with 100 years of opportunity, we haven't achieved 1% of what they had. In the worst times under the Ottomans, the Muslims were better off than we are today. And I challenge anyone to disprove me on that one. Even at the worst possible time under the Ottoman Empire, the Muslims were better off than they are today. There were no Zionists occupying Jerusalem and killing thousands of Muslims. Even at the worst possible point of the Ottoman Empire, that was an impossibility. Yet here we are today, 100 years later, to a billion plus, and we can't even get, we can't even take an inch back from the Ummah. So it's not a matter of perfection. It's a matter of the likelihood of this unification happening. And based on Deen, that is even less likely. Like a Pan-Islamic unification based on Deen, I haven't seen that in the I haven't seen that in history, to be honest with you. Between Sunni and Shia, I haven't seen that. There was a point in time in the 80s when we came close to something like that within the Sunni world. And that was in Afghanistan. The jihad in Afghanistan. Because the enemy was Russia. So there was unification. But as soon as Russia went out of the equation, we know what happened afterwards between the Muslims. So it's a difficult thing to demand. But I welcome a different perspective. I think if anybody has a different perspective, Bismillah.
Ustad Ibrahim, can you hear me?
I can hear you very well.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
Just to comment regarding the unification of Ummah, my opinion is that is it necessary to have one Khilafah right now? If it leads to a lot of bloodshed, can we meet Allah يعني, with this? يعني, can you meet Allah with the burden of, يعني, for example, just for the purpose of having one Khalifa, for example, we are going to fight and we are going to expand. I don't think this is the purpose of, يعني, currently, as different nations, we have Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, Egypt, all of these countries now with a lot of different mindsets and opinions. Just a lot of Muslims now are pushing or thinking that we will not يعني, improve until we have one Khalifa, then we can start. It's from this point, you know.
But when did we see that? When did we see that?
I don't say that you said it, but
no, I'm agreeing with you. I'm saying exactly. When did we see that model? Beyond the 30 years in the very early phase of Islamic history. Have we seen just one Khalifa, and everybody's united and together?
But يعني a lot of the يعني da'iyas or people who are calling for the return of Khilafah, how can you first, how will you return this Khilafah? يعني you will face a lot of bloodshed among the Muslim, and is it the يعني the purpose of Deen to have Khilafah or to worship Allah? يعني this is the purpose of Deen first. يعني
you open a big door. You open a big door. Barakallahu feekum. You open a big door. Anybody want to jump in there and just close the door again? Brother Sharif, your hand is up. I think if you want to speak, your hand is up, yeah? MB Sharif, your hand is up if you want to speak. Brother Abdurrahman Muhammad.
Yeah, Ustad, I had a question, but it's not regarding this topic right now. So I'm gonna let the brother get a response, then inshallah I'll speak.
Okay, tafaddal. Whenever you're ready, inshallah. Whenever you're ready.
Inshallah.
Okay, I mean, look. The idea of a Khilafah coming along and fixing all the problems, it would be nice, quite frankly. It would be nice. But I can go on, I can give you a list of times when Muslims came along. Let's take just a simple example. When Al-Murabitun came to the Iberian Peninsula and they saved the day, right? There was a problem in Iberian Peninsula. The Catholics were coming down and the Muslims were being fine. Al-Murabitun come and save the day, right? How long did it last? How long did that, not the Khilafah, Sultanate last, an Emirate last? Not very long, because soon after you had Al-Muwahhidun, straight after that. And there was bloodshed, and there was conflict, and there was persecution, and there was fighting between these two dynasties. It just, somebody has to be superior and has to be an authority. And that oftentimes means conflict, fighting, bloodshed, fortunately. Uh, it isn't, I would say, and I'm going to perhaps upset some people here on purpose. Ibn Khaldun, I believe he was right. He said that the Khilafah is not a necessity. In the Muqaddimah, he says you can rule by any way so long as it's not obviously kufr and shirk. The form of governance is left open. Yeah, what's important is you establish justice, you establish deen. Whether you rule as a kingdom, and he favored kingdoms, but he said kingdoms are the optimal way of ruling, believe it or not. He favors kingdoms. Or you have a state, or you have a republic. What's more important is the society is functioning. Safety is established. There's freedom of religion. This is what he prioritizes. He's a pragmatist, effectively. Saying rather than waiting for all the pieces to come together, you have a united ummah, one khalifa, everything works perfectly. You're better off working on what you have right now. And in fact, who said you have to have a khilafah? That's the question he poses. Who even said? Where does Allah say khilafah has to be established? Yeah, that's a greater question. But it's a matter of being pragmatic or waiting for everything to come in place. And if we look at what's happening in Gaza right now, I don't think we have the luxury to right now, at this moment, talk about establishing khilafah. We haven't done it in 100 years. And suddenly, at a time of dire need, we're going to establish one. I don't think it's realistic. I don't think it's a bad idea to have. I just don't think it's the most pragmatic and you could say a practical idea to push forward at this point. Brother Talha, Brother Sharif.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry to jump in again. Ustad Ibrahim, would you say that the most important thing that Ibn Khaldun is trying to imply is as long as the maqasid al-sharia are met,
Thank you.
then all is well and good, really.
Basically, yeah. And he even goes a bit too far, actually. He goes a bit. He's hyper. He's extremely pro monarchy. Very, very much so. But the point is, he was a politician. He actually was a politician, a career politician. He was a scholar. He was a judge. So he understood that the ideal of a khilafah, he talks of this, that the early Muslims, they had easier challenges. They lived in a pure environment. They had a more pristine religion. So what they had to face as rulers and subjects was very different to what the later generations have to face. There's a greater diversity of thoughts, of schools, of ideas. Islam is spread across the world. Imagine trying to unite all of that under one single ruler, right? And waiting for that to happen before you can fix problems. It would be a long time. It'd be a long time before that happens. And we really haven't seen it in the past. The Ottomans just about managed, because if you look at the Ottoman Empire, parts of Europe, North Africa, Central Asia, Arabia, but even within Arabia, they didn't have control over every region. There were still regions within Arabia that were not under Ottoman control, and same with North Africa, right? But they represented something. There was representation of Islam as an institution, that there is someone called a Sultan or Khalifa. There is an army. There is a unification of some sort out there. And that is enough. The idea that something exists out there that represents that thing is enough in most cases. You don't have to have 100% perfection. It's enough. We don't have even that. We don't even have that shadow at the moment. We don't even have that to look forward to look up to. So our situation is very dire, which is why we're looking to, for example, Iran and Saudi. These are like proxies, effectively. I mean, if we don't have a Khilafah, what do we have? Well, we have Saudi, we have Iran. But if we're waiting for them to unite, and to somehow form a coalition against the Zionists or the West, we're going to wait a long time, because what divides them is greater than what could possibly bring them together. Yeah. What divides them is far greater than what could possibly bring them together, and that's where we're finding a lot of frustration. And I understand people saying, "Listen, these divisions are never going to be resolved. If we're going to wait for them to somehow be resolved, we'll be here forever. Why don't we just have a unification based on Islam? That's it." That sounds very idealistic, but the differences are so vast that again, I would love to be proven wrong on this. I would love to wake up one day and hear that yes, there's unification. They're going to fight and help the people of Gaza. That would be amazing, But I wouldn't want to live on that dream. I would only live with that dream. So,
Ustad Ibrahim, I had a question in regards to the history of Somalia and the Saudis' involvement in its current situation, and as well as the US. If you're able to as well direct me to any books that do go over that, just because it's a bit too detailed, that would also be appreciated.
okay. If I can answer it,
Inshallah.
Is that the question?
Yeah, the question is the Saudis' involvement and the West, especially the United States' involvement in the current predicament of Somalia.
The best person I could direct you towards is Ustad Abdullah Artan, Muhammad Artan. Have you heard of his? He has a Luhcast. Let me just type it in.
Yeah, please.
He's on the channel. He's done 2 interviews. Well, he's done many before, but he's done 2 recent interviews. Luh Press, also Luhcast. So Luhcast, and he is Muhammad Abdullah Artan, Ustad. You'll find him on he's mostly active on Instagram. So Ustad. So he's very well versed in that region and the history. That's all he does basically. He's very well versed in that. I would certainly defer to him in terms of that. He'll definitely have something to offer. If not, at least can direct you to amazing books. He does have a publication company that deals with East Africa and East African history, so I'm sure he has a lot of recommendations and great people to direct you towards, inshallah.
Inshallah. Jazakallah khairan. Appreciate it.
All right, guys, we've just hit the hour. Does anyone have any question, any statements, anything before we call it a day? The book again is Cold War in the Islamic World, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the Struggle for Supremacy. Dilip Hero. It's a very detailed book. It has great chapters that will give you the backdrop as well to how this thing began in the 70s. And up until the current epoch, it gives you updates. So it's a very good book if you want to get into the that sort of discussion and to make sense of what's happening in the world right now. This is a great book to read into. You don't have to agree with everything he says, but it gives you a great outline, its skeletal framework. You can kind of get an idea as to why potentially an Iran-Saudi coalition may not be likely, and what's driving each party. What's the driving factors to why each party wants to be effectively above the other, and where the directions are going in terms of that. Yeah.
I have something to say, brother Rahim.
Bismillah.
As you have mentioned, يعني, the Ummah of Islam right now is like a burning house. يعني, we don't only have Gaza. يعني, we have a lot of Muslim places that suffer.
A lot of places.
And I believe it's the responsibility, it's a life challenge for all of us to understand our diseases, our problems. It's not that easy. It's a big challenge actually to go beyond the media and what the media is telling you, يعني, and have يعني, deep reading with you, and also refer always to Quran and Sunnah to understand يعني, the problems of this ummah. Because يعني, if you go with the media, I believe you will be fooled. in addition to the politics. يعني I can see a lot of يعني from my perspective at least a lot of Muslims are following the media, especially about the politics of the يعني countries like Saudi Arabia, like Iran, like other countries. The politics is a big branch of knowledge. يعني you will not understand from the news that this country is يعني is يعني like a threat to the United States or is an ally with the Israel or any country. You need to go beyond the news. يعني that's what I wanted to say, and I hope my language يعني helped me.
That's very good. It's very good. It's very good. And I think it's a good point to re-emphasize. I posted the other day on the channel, just a small reminder. I said, listen, we are trying everything possible, right? Based on our capacity. The Muslim Ummah is bleeding, and we're all trying to put a bandage on the wounds. Some of us take a certain stance that our solution will be to actually petition the governments of the world, the International Court of Justice, to petition to somehow find some way of lobbying or campaigning on behalf of the Palestinians. That's not a bad thing. That's not a bad thing. Others, we need to boycott, economic withdrawal. That's not a bad thing either, right? But the problem is, before you dress a wound, what do you have to do? You have a wound, they're almost bleeding, right? There's blood gushing, there's a wound. We're trying to bandage it with different forms of bandage. Before you dress a wound, what do you have to do first? Somebody help me, please. Yeah.
Stop the bleeding.
Before that, okay, stop the bleeding, that's one thing. But what do you have to do before you...
Disinfect the wound, right?
Barakallahu
You've got
feekum.
to clean it.
Barakallahu feekum. What happens if you start bandaging a wound that's already infected and you haven't disinfected it? What happens?
It'll just get infected, really.
It gets worse because now there's no oxygen. All right, the wound is already festering, and you put a bandage on it. It looks nice, but you're making it worse, right? You have to disinfect it. And what happens when you disinfect a wound? What happens initially? What's the initial reaction?
Hurt.
Hurt, yes, pain, right? I take alcohol, I start spraying on the wound. Allahu Akbar, right? How do we disinfect the wound that's happening right now in the Ummah? How do we disinfect the wound? Before we dress it up and bandage, how do we disinfect it? We need to make tazkiyah of ourselves. People don't like to hear this. I got a lot of people, you are bootlicker, you're Saudi. I said, no. You need to disinfect the wound. That begins by you, first of all, fix yourself. You're not praying 5 times a day. How are you going to petition anybody else? Right? You need to fix yourself first, your household first. Work with the disinfectant first. And then we can work on actually putting something on the wound. Whatever we put on it right now is just temporary. And actually, underneath the wound will be even worse. I guarantee you. We can cover the wound with boycotting, protests, but under the wound will be even worse. Clean it. That cleaning process will be painful. I know. It will be painful, but it's necessary. And that's what the ulama are calling for. Ya Muslimin, look in the mirror. Fix yourselves. Clean the wound. And then we can put a bandage on it, inshallah. It will heal naturally. Yeah. And so that's the reminder. At the end of the day, you're right. Politics this, politics that. We're running around. Who should we vote for? Should we not vote at all? This is beyond the point. At this stage, this is beyond the point. I think there are stages we're missing on purpose because it's not convenient. We're missing these steps on purpose. It's not convenient. But if we were to really pay attention and say, right, what are we doing wrong as an ummah? There was a time when the Muslims would go to war and they would lose a battle. And the post-war analysis was, we failed to use the miswak. We left the sunnah of miswak. So we lost the war. They were looking at the detail. How did we lose the war? And they came to the point of, we didn't use miswak. So we lost the war. Some of us are not praying. I've been, when I was in my 20s, I've gone to all the protests in London. I've been to all the protests in London. And I can tell you, first-hand experience, if you have 100,000 people that turn up at the protest, you're lucky to have 1,000 praying. Let's have to pray. You're going to miss prayers, left and right. Left and right. You'll find a few people praying on the corner, on the side, but how many people didn't pray in that period of time? How many people didn't pray? What's more important? That we establish the salah and fix ourselves because we are part of the ummah, or that we spend the whole day protesting, then we go home and what have we achieved? We're going to protest again next week and the week after that. So the reality really is we need to look at ourselves really and ask ourselves, are we doing what we're supposed to be doing at this stage? You know, I gave an example. People didn't like it. And quite frankly, I find it strange that if we come out and say, let's boycott company X, Y, Z, let's send a petition, the majority will say, let's go for it. Bismillah, let's sign the petitions. But the moment you say, call Allah, call Rasul, straight away, people are upset. Sayyidina Musa in Egypt, did Allah say to him, go? No, he said to him, enter your homes and turn them into masajid. Pray. Ensure that your followers are praying. Fortify yourselves with salah. Pray. Begin there. Because what's going to come after this is going to be a very difficult challenge. And you will not pass the challenge if the people that you're relying upon don't have the tarbiyah to actually go through with the process. The people today who are calling for change, for khilafah, let's bring a khilafah, let's bring a change. If we had a khalifa today, he established sharia, how many of us would rebel against him? How many of us have the mentality, the tarbiyah, to be patient with somebody establishing khilafah fully above us? We would have a hard time. We would have a hard time. Yeah. So we have to clean the wound. It will be painful. And then inshallah, we can put a bandage on it. That's really the takeaway. But yes, we can talk big talk, politics, unification, khilafah. But the reality is we're not doing the basics.
There is a story actually, Ibrahim, if you allow me, Ustad Ibrahim.
Bismillah, bismillah.
That happened to me before many years. I was talking to one of my friends about what is happening to our brothers in some country. And I was very angry. And I was saying, why don't we do something? Our people, our brothers and sisters are dying every day. He replied with something I will not forget. He said to me, brother, do you prefer to live in the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, for example, in the time of the glory to this deen, but you go to hellfire after that, or you live in this time of weakness to Muslims, but you go to Jannah? Which one do you prefer? I said to him, of course, I want to go to Jannah. He said, what you have to do is the same in the time of Umar or in this time. As you mentioned, stick to Quran, Sunnah. If all of the Ummah do this, we will be strong.
Not even all of the Ummah, brother. You don't need the whole Ummah to do it. If 20% did it, even 10%, right? You don't need the whole Ummah to do it. If a sizable portion of the Ummah did something like that, 10%, let's say 10%, the rest will follow because we're natural followers. They have all these experiments at university level where they experiment and they put 100 people in a room. 5 of them were already told before the room began, you will take a certain direction, you will walk a certain direction. They've already been briefed, 5 of them. The rest of them, 95, didn't have any briefing. They were just put in a room and taught to walk around. And what happened was the 5 who were instructed to walk a certain direction, when they began to walk that direction, what happens naturally?
They follow.
People follow. Before you know it, you have a herd walk in one direction. So we don't even need 100%. We will never get 100%. if 10, 20% of the ummah was to make the internal work necessary, tazkiyat al-nafs, the tarbiyah needed, I'm going to pray on time. If I'm a woman, I'm going to wear hijab. We don't even talk about these things, right? I'm going to stop doing haram. There are many things we're doing that's haram right now. 10% did that and committed themselves to that, or at least try to raise a generation that does that. We could achieve a lot more that way because the rest would follow. Yeah. But if we want to put it on a one person at the top, well, let's have a Khalifa. He does all the work. He's going to pay do all the work. We'll be waiting a long time. I don't think it's the most pragmatic way to go about doing it. But personally, I think we look in the mirror, we ask ourselves a real question. What am I doing right now? How can I improve my situation so I can be a better component of the Ummah and produce more like me? If I have children, I can produce more like me whilst doing the other things as well. I'm not saying do nothing. Continue the boycotts. I'm boycotting. Protesting, if that's what you do, that's fine. Continue. But at the very least, the foundation should be there. You fix yourself first and foremost, your household first and foremost. And then the rest will come, inshallah. But I'm open to be corrected. Honestly, I'm open to be corrected. It's been great. I really appreciate your time. I think what we can do is, if you want, we can continue this topic next week. If you feel like we need to develop further, feel free to suggest topics in the group, inshallah. But I
Ustad
genuinely,
Ibrahim,
yes,
you know, I just want to ask something, right? You know, going forward, first of all, Barakallahu feek, Ahsanallahu ilaykum for the session today was really beneficial. Going forward, would you suggest that, you know, as a group we go through a certain topic or a certain chapter in the book, and then obviously we can have a more specific kind of conversation?
I agree. Yeah, I agree. These are just it's the second one. I just want people to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
comfortable coming online and speaking. I was thinking because I've got the
It's gonna be
muqaddimah.
nothing, right?
I've
It's
got the
gonna be nothing.
muqaddimah
The
on
math's
the
not gonna.
Yeah.
somebody's on. I've got the
Just
muqaddimah
like
on
that.
PDF, right? So maybe I'll post a poll in the group.
Okay.
Who would like to study the muqaddimah live like this? We'll put it on the screen. We'll go through it, discuss it topically like this. That way, every week we can cover the book page by page, and that way we have a structure. Because within the muqaddimah, all of these topics are covered anyway. Quite frankly, Khilafah or not Khilafah, how to organize governments, how to organize people, how to defend the realms. All of these are covered anyway, but it'll be a more thematic and a more structured way of covering the book while also discussing modern day topics. I think if people prefer that format, I'm more than happy to go ahead
I,
and do that
I
for next week,
think
inshallah.
I think
Inshallah,
that'll
I'm
be
for it as well.
more beneficial because you can purchase the Muqaddimah, read it, but you need someone to you need a teacher for Muqaddimah. It's not something you can read yourself and figure it out yourself.
It's a group thing. You're right, brother Hassan. It's a group thing. Yeah. If anybody has watched the video that I posted yesterday, Osman Adler, when he talks of reading books and having people to come to
Conversation, yeah.
discuss, exactly, yeah, that's exactly what we need because you get different
Yeah.
perspectives from different people. But I think that way, if we did it that way, perfect. We can cover the muqaddimah as a group, and we can have topical discussions, and I think that will give us
But
structure.
then we also have to ask what's our intentions for reading. Is it just to gain an insight or is it to gain an understanding? Because he mentions that in his book as well on how to read a book.
I think it will give us a lot of insight, honestly. It's a book I go to all the time, back and forth. There is a lot in there, and there's one of the reasons why he's special in that sense. Uh, there's an intellectual, Abdul Samad Clark. He writes in the introduction of another book, The Umayyads, that Ibn Khaldun is different because he combines two factors. He is a scholar, which is very important, but he's also a career politician, a very pragmatic, and he served under various establishments in North Africa and in the Iberian Peninsula. He met with great rulers, Timur, for example. So he had not just the theory of it, because there are many people who can write the theory of government. He was in the lifestyle. That was his lifestyle. So when he gives commentary, and he gives a lot of commentary about where people went wrong, The Abbasids went wrong because of this. The Umayyads did this, and this happened. And the political landscape in the early phase of Islam was different because X, Y, and Z. So he gives us a more pragmatic and realistic framework with which we can have discussions about these sorts of things. It's more realistic.
Can one argue because he wrote that in maybe the 16th, 17th century? Do a lot of his points, are they still relevant to the 21st century, or?
That's a test of time. And he writes in a way that's not necessarily he doesn't address only his time. He talks of the framework of civilization, the various stages, the cycles. And quite frankly, if you look at certain empires and the way they went up and down and the cycles, they do follow his cycle, his framework. He's just giving you a blueprint. He's not telling you this is what will happen every time in every situation. He's saying a framework exists and it looks like this. First comes this, then comes this, then comes this, then comes this. And typically it lasts this long, 4 generations. And typically these are the telltale signs, and this is the weakness, it's the strength. So it's giving you a framework that you can work with.
Yeah, I think the initiative is great. I think it would be better as like a course with casework studies on it as well. Maybe
That would take us.
but
You
that
give
would
me ideas. That'll take us
that,
years. You're trying to get a Muqaddimah course out of me. I know what you're trying to do. Yeah. We will be here for years.
It
We'll
was
be here
worth
for
a shot.
years. We'll be here for years. No, I think this is good because look, I want people to have the opportunity to just join in without being part of a course, and also to give their ideas. It's an open
Is
platform.
something grapes in good sleep?
Sorry, Brother Shiraz.
Yeah, he told you to go to sleep.
It's almost bedtime for me, I know. But yeah, I mean, it will take a long time, quite frankly. It'll take a long time to do a course. But I think if people are interested, we can do it. That's why you can read the Muqaddim on Tuesdays. If you have a book, a physical copy, great. If you don't have one, I can put it on screen and we can analyze it together. But as I said before, it's a framework, and within the Muqaddimah, everything is in there, quite frankly. We're talking about state building, we're talking about civilization, if we're talking about defense, if we're talking about economy, if we're talking about sociology, all of it is there. All of it is there. So inshallah, I'll put that poll in, and hopefully next week we can meet again this time, and
Inshallah.
you can read the Muqaddimah.
Jazakallah khairan.
Barakallahu feekum, barakallahu feekum, and thank you for joining once again. Thank you all for joining.